This is interpersonal communications on strategies for managing conflict and what components are required in deciding that something is a conflict or not. What we're going to talk about are numerous characteristics of destructive conflict, ways that people engage in ineffective or detrimental conflict, constructive and productive conflict, and what outcomes should come about as a result of that. And the last thing we're going to end with is a discussion of conflict styles that people have. So if you follow along in the slideshow with me, slide number 2, we talk about the definition of conflict and about the disagreement that is typically lack of resolution about something that's important. The next slide is primarily about ways that people engage in ineffective or detrimental conflict, and all of these destructive conflicts, like sending emails or texts, are characterized by not at all discussing the situation. People engage in any number of the following destructive conflict characteristics. What happens basically with an avoidance spiral is that you're trying to resolve the conflict by way of diminishing the amount of interdependence between two people in the relationship. So when we engage in an avoidance spiral, we engage in a variety of avoidant types of communication. So we engage in less direct interaction. So we might engage in a lot of mediated interaction, and so rather than actually having a conversation, we adopt less direct mediums of interaction. We also engage in active avoidance of the other person by and large, and so I will be where you are not. If I know that you're going to be home early, I'm going to stay out late, things like this. So as long as we don't have to see each other, we don't actually have to confront the conflict issue. One of the very first types of destructive conflict that people engage in are escalatory spirals. And what you're going to notice over the course of all of these destructive conflict strategies are that there's a distraction away from the actual conflict issue. So remember, if you're having a conflict, you're perceiving incompatible goals or scarce resources, and that should be the thing that you're talking about and attempting to resolve. And when we engage in destructive conflict, typically what we're doing is we're deviating away from the issue, and we're more worried about fighting for what we want and making ourselves heard than to find a creative solution. When we engage in an escalatory spiral, we move away from being able to be logical and reasonable, and we start behaving in a primarily emotional fashion. So on that same slide, slide number 4, we talk about an avoidance spiral. People engage in any number of the following destructive conflict characteristics. We act out of hurt. Again, hurt is the predominant emotion in conflict. And so when we're hurt, we want the other person to feel as bad as we are. And so we start moving away from talking about the issue to attacking the other person. So because I believe that you're the one causing interference in my ability to achieve my goals or get my resources, I'm going to hurt you in the way that I perceive that you're hurting me. And again, no focus is placed on resolving the issue at all. Kind of on the other end of the spectrum of an avoidance or an escalatory spiral is an avoidance spiral, which we can see there on slide number 5. We have 3 things, and what happens with an avoidance spiral is instead of ratcheting up the interaction in the conflict to be able to start attacking your partner, instead what you do is you withdraw from your partner, and there's a reduction of dependence on the other party, and then therefore subsequently the other party's influence over your behaviors. And so basically, again, we also reduce our dependence. And so for instance, if you're having a situation where, for instance, you're having a conflict over, say, who's going to borrow the car, and you want to take the car to work because you're going to go to the gym after class and you want to be able to just drive home afterwards, we reduce our dependence and we make this a non-conflict issue by avoiding conversation with the partner in any number of ways. And so we can reduce our overall dependence where the particular conflict issue is concerned, such as in the case of the car, or we can reduce our overall dependence. On the next slide there, we see how to manage conflicts, and basically what we see is you have to be able to work together to find a mutually satisfying situation. We don't see too much overlap in those two. If a person is going to be in a conflict, they typically don't want to be working together with the other person. Now, in addition, you feel like you want to get back at the other person. You don't want to expend energy for some reason to have a conversation with your partner in an attempt to resolve the issue, but you are willing to go out of your way to find ways to hurt them. So if part of your conflict issue is that you feel like you want more respect from your partner and your partner's not willing to give you more respect, the most is what you might choose to do, again, instead of resolving the conflict issue. And part of what happens with this is that people change over time. People learn different communicative skills, and typically what you should be focused on is what is in the best interest of the relationship. So how do we maximize the positivity and benefit in our relationship as we manage this conflict situation? When you're competitive, you care about winning and primarily about winning and virtually nothing else. And when dominance and subordination is a theme in the relationship or the conflict, what often happens is that the more dominant party can just ignore. So ideally, what you should be doing is emphasizing characteristics of constructive conflict in your relationship, which we're going to talk about for slide number 7. So one of the first things is acknowledgement that people do change. You do that in order to encourage constructive conflict, and so this is an emphasis on flexibility and adaptation. And so we adapt to the situation, we adapt to changes in our partner, we also have to adapt to changes in our partner's needs. And a lot of times what people say is you have to be able to recognize that changes in your partner in order to be legitimately effective at having constructive conflict with them. In addition, constructive conflict is characterized by people's intention to learn about their partner, about the relationship, about their partner's needs, about how to better engage with their partner, learn something, learn anything, rather than protect themselves. If you go in with the expectation that you're going to absorb information that you're going to use to be better able to manage a similar situation in the future, you come out better. So conflict can actually be very rewarding in that case. Also on that same slide, not being stuck. And basically, when you're stuck in a conflict, I don't know if you've ever had the experience, I've had this experience a lot in my conflicts, where we get in a conversation, my sister and I actually have this happen a lot, where we actually kind of just go around and around and around and around, and we get stuck in the pattern of having the conflict and talking about the conflict issue, so much so that we haven't bothered to recognize that one of us has sort of unwittingly changed. If we get stuck in the pattern of actually engaging in the conflict, that can actually exacerbate the situation because we're not paying attention to the fact that we've resolved it. And so you have to make the recognition that conflict moves and it changes, and people do, even in an interaction, they will change. And that's the point, is that you're supposed to move from your original places where you disagree to a middle ground where you do agree. But if you get stuck in a pattern of just kind of rolling around in the same conflict, you're not going to get anything done. We've got more on how to manage conflicts, and this is one of the major problems with destructive conflict, is that people engaged in escalatory spirals or avoidance spirals or engaging in retaliation and things like this in competition, we expect that we're going to go into a conflict and that there's going to be a fight, and that somebody's going to come out winning and somebody's going to come out crying. And we don't want to be the one coming out crying and having not gotten what we came in to get. And so we put our defenses up and we protect ourselves more than anything else. When you're protecting yourself, you're very disinclined to entertain your partner's wishes or desires. And so this sort of defensive protective nature is actually very oppositional to engaging in productive conflict in a relationship. And so what you want to do is go into it with the orientation that I'm going to learn something about what my partner needs. We're clearly having a conflict because we're in opposition with each other. What is it about my partner? What do they value that is causing the situation to exist? I want to learn about how to better manage my partner, how to manage our relationship better. Going on to slide number 8 there, characteristics of constructive conflict, and this is what constructive conflict is supposed to look like. And so a constructive conflict actually results in an enhancement of self-esteem by both parties. And so we feel really good when we're able to go into a conflict situation with our partner, especially a significant other partner, and we can say to our partner, I have this problem, I think we're having a conflict, and you and partner constructively negotiate what all it is you're going to do to resolve the situation. You both feel really good about yourselves. You feel good about the fact that you're in a relationship with a partner who cares enough about you to be able to negotiate with you. You wind up feeling efficacious, that is, you have the ability to manage your own communication and your own emotions in a conflict episode so that you feel better able to engage in other conflicts with other people in a similarly productive fashion. And so we feel better about ourselves in general, we feel better about ourselves as partners, and we feel better about ourselves as communicators. And then the other thing, one person's attempt at a constructive conflict is insufficient. You have to have both parties on board. Well, it's easy for us to recognize a destructive conflict, and it's easy to recognize a constructive conflict, and it takes a lot of effort to do a constructive conflict, but the fact is it's doable. The thing that sometimes interferes with our ability to do this, though, is our general orientation or our style with which we like to have conflict. And so the last thing that we're going to talk about here on the next slide are your conflict styles. And there are 5: accommodation, avoidance, competition, compromise, and collaboration. And basically, these 4 things fall along 2 dimensions. One is a dimension of concern for the other person, and the other dimension is the level of concern you have for yourself. And so this kind of reduces it to a dichotomous, that either you have some concern for yourself, you have concern for yourself and not for your partner. You can have more concern for yourself and less concern for your partner, and then you wind up having a sort of poor communication style, but this is an easy way to think about and talk about it. So the first conflict style that I want to talk about is actually avoidance. And avoidance is characterized by low concern for self and low concern for other. And the reason that avoidance is classified as being low concern for self and other is because when you have no interest in getting your own needs met and you have no interest in seeing your partner's needs met is when you will choose not to engage the conflict. So your approach is to like, I'm less concerned about either of us achieving a goal than I am about not having a conflict with you. And in the end, what you do is you give up to your partner and you say you let your partner get their way in the conflict situation. And a lot of times this happens because you have poor conflict styles. You may feel yourself as having low power in the relationship, and you feel like if you disrupt or rock the boat, then your partner is motivated to terminate the relationship. You might just be that selfless a person, and you give up into your partner's needs will ultimately again create resentment in the relationship, which is not good for the relationship. And so it's very important for a person who has an accommodating conflict style to recognize that although it might be perceived as a selfless thing to do, to see to it that my partner's needs are met no matter what happens, you're another person in the relationship and you do have needs and you're entitled to have those needs. What I want to move then is to the middle. There is in the middle of a moderate concern for the other person getting their needs met and a moderate concern for my getting my own needs met is compromise. And compromise is often touted in the popular media, popular press as kind of the ideal way to go about solving a conflict, which it's better than the others, but it's not ideal. And the reason is a compromise conflict resolution ultimately results in both parties not getting what they came in wanting. They get something else instead. And so we both have to compromise our original goals for something that we do find mutually agreeable, but we don't like as well. Ideally, what you should be striving for is a conflict style that reflects a high degree of concern for both you and your partner getting your needs met in a conflict situation, which is characterized by a collaborative conflict strategy. And in when we engage in collaboration, what we're doing is we're working together, so we're being cooperative, we're both being creative, we're both trying to find a solution, an outcome that we are both satisfied with, so that we're both equally happy with the outcome of the conflict, and the outcome that we wind up with is either the thing that we came in wanting or it's as good an alternative, so I don't feel like I've lost anything. So when you're trying to achieve a collaborative solution, you may not come out with exactly what it was that you wanted, but you don't feel like you've lost anything in getting the alternative. And this is what happens when you come up with a creative conflict strategy, is that, the point is for me to feel satisfied. I want to achieve my goals, and the achievement of my goals is going to result in my satisfaction. And as long as you're able to do that, even with an alternative to what you originally wanted, you're fine. The problem is that typically with compromise, I might come out with an alternative to what I actually wanted, but I will evaluate that alternative as being less good or less quality than the thing that I came in wanting, the positive ones. And you kind of want to be mindful of what your conflict style is so that you can have a better grasp on how it is you're engaging in conflict with your partner. So there we are, our conversation on conflict management in interpersonal communication in relationships.